Hi everybody, my name is Jonathan Taylor. I'm the Technical Marketing Manager for Civil Survey Solutions. And today I'm going to be welcoming you to the technical webcast, Civil 3D Alignment Styles and Settings. Now today your presenter is Todd Brewster. Todd is in Melbourne whilst I'm based in Sydney. Todd, hi, are you there?
I'm here, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, keeping well, as we are hoping that all of you guys are. Todd is our application engineer. He's based with the team in Melbourne. Also Civil 3D Guru, and you'll have seen, for those of you that have used Civil 3D for a while, in association with our template, Todd's name around and about. And some of you may have hopefully seen the fantastic webcast he did last month, which was related to templates and a 101 on specifically around DWTs and templates with Civil 3D. If you haven't seen it, really worthwhile going to go and have a review of that and a watch. And then out of that webcast, we ended up doing a poll, and really the top poll item that came out of that was to undertake a Civil 3D alignment based webcast, which is what you're going to be doing today, Todd.
It is indeed. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. I'll hand over to you.
Fantastic. Okay, can you see my screen?
I can.
Fantastic. All right, so you've just stolen my thunder for my introduction. Thank you for that.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. So yes, the webcast we did about a month ago on the 16th of July was all about Civil 3D templates, basics 101. And a lot of the stuff we covered in there was sort of the basics of setting up templates, setting up styles, how the mechanisms work within the software to actually configure the software the way you like it. And as John alluded to, at the end of the session, we had a poll about what people may want to see moving forward, and alignments was our winner, which is why we are here today. So we're going to be building on everything we did from that last session. So I'm actually going to use the stuff we did from the last one and make some further enhancements. So in that previous session, if you haven't seen it, as Jonathan suggested, strongly encourage you to go and have a look at it, because some of the things I'm going to look at today, I'm not going to explain in great detail of why and how certain things happen. It's all covered in that previous webcast. So go and jump on our YouTube channel, look it up, enjoy. Okay, so today's session, we're going to look specifically at alignment. So we're going to look a lot deeper than we did in that first one. We're going to have a quick look over the alignment styles that we looked at and created last time, have a bit more discussion on those. Then we're going to jump into talking about the design checks. How do you set those up? Then we're going to jump into the labeling. We're going to look at some Chainage labels. We're going to do a quick recap on the label sets and how you apply those to your objects in the drawing. Then we're going to jump in and muck around with some Chainage offset labels. Then we're going to move into what's called segment labels and table tags. I'll explain a lot of this stuff when I get to them. And then table tags leads us into tables. So we'll look at setting up a table style and modifying one the way we like it. And in the end, we're going to review a few of the command settings, so show you some of the things you might be able to configure, make life a little easier for yourself as you're moving forward. And throughout the whole webcast, I'm going to throw in a few tips and tricks here and there of things that I have learned over the years that you might find useful. Okay, so let's get started. So as I mentioned, I'm using the drawing from last time. JT, can you confirm you can see my drawing?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Caught him off guard, I suspect.
You did. Furiously trying to find the unmute button.
All right, now you can mute yourself. That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, so this drawing is actually the file I finished with in the last session. So it has got the same couple of alignments we made, the table style that we generated for the surface. It even has the same surface and labeling that we made. The only thing I've done different to this surface, to this file, is change the display of the surface. If you recall last time, it was very bright and yellow so that it would stand out in the drawing. I've dulled it off so that it's not so dominant. I have actually added a few extra alignments to work with and a bit of drafting and an aerial photo just to give context to what we're actually working on. So let me turn everything on so you can see everything. I'll switch to actual Civil 3D. There we go. All right, so this is the stuff we're going to work with today. So there's already some alignment sitting in here that I am going to enhance with labeling, configured with styles, and have lots of fun with. So first thing I want to talk about was the alignment style, so the object style itself. So for those of you who have used Civil 3D before, and I'm hoping all of you have, the tool space is your everything for your civil objects in terms of finding them. The settings tab is your everything in Civil 3D for configuring them and how they look and how they run, how they display and how they label and how they table and how they play with each other. In the last session, I did talk about ways you can turn on and off this stuff if it's not here, and I talked about it being in the View tab. It's also hidden away in the Home tab. Here in the first one, Palettes. This button here is actually the display of the Settings tab within the tool space. So if the tool space is on, you press the big button. If you want to turn on the individual tabs for the tool space, you can actually click on them here. It's exactly the same panel as what shows up in the view. Okay. The alignments that are sitting in this drawing are nothing elaborate. There is an alignment sitting here on the right, which is representing an existing crown. There is a kind of main road alignment sitting along here. It's actually got some spirals in it, which we're going to look at in a little bit. And then through here are some proposed alignments for the center lines of a couple of roads for a small subdivision. These 4 alignments over here are actually all using the style of alignment that we created last time. So if I come in and actually go in and look at the style, it is the basic style that I made in my previous session. And just as a recap of how it works and how I configured this particular one, an alignment's made up of up to 3 component types in terms of the physical alignment. There is lines and curves, potentially spirals as well. So you can configure each of those subcomponents to look and behave differently in terms of display. In this particular style, I have got all 3 of them set to be using layer 0, so the layer the object is created on, and they're actually set to color by block, which is how I was able to set the alignment that runs north-south here, the existing crown, to be green, whereas this alignment here is yellow, because I've set the object color of that green alignment to be green to make it look differently, but they all reside on the same layer. The other pieces are the arrow, which is the marker that indicates a direction. It can be turned on and off. You can nominate a specific layer. In this case, I had set one that I have configured, as the name implies, not to plot in my drawing. The other pieces here are all turned off. Now, I did allude to this in the previous webcast, and I am going to reiterate it today because it is very important. This is what this alignment will look like when I'm looking in my plan top-down view direction, which is the view space I'm looking in at the moment. So basically this top. So if you see where my cursor is right now, I'm in top view of my drawing. If I spin it into 3D, it is what is defined here as view direction of model. I can actually configure my alignments to look completely different. I can turn off different elements, make them display in different colors, different layers, anything I feel like. So when you're editing these things and you'll want to change what it looks like in a plan, make sure your view direction is on plan. The last one is section. So if your alignment was showing up in a section view, then you can configure how it appears in section view. All right, so the bits that I didn't really allude to in great detail last time were the 2 pieces here. I did talk a little bit about markers and design, but I'm going to give you a bit more detail on them now. So design is all about the snap behavior, as the screen implies, the snap behavior of radiuses. So if you turn that on, you set a value. So if I set, say, 5, basically anytime I drag an alignment curve, so change its radius, I can only change it in increments of 5, or whatever value I specify. Now, it's only for grip editing. It doesn't apply if you're using the editing functions to type in a radius. That will override that snap. It's just a snap in terms of drag editing. So I'll highlight in a minute how that works. And then the other tab that we hadn't looked at in detail is the markers tab. So I did talk about it previously about configuring the arrowhead on how you wanted the marker to appear for that. The alignment points, there are a bundle of geometric alignment combinations along your alignments that potentially exist. And you can configure them to be marked in different ways if you choose to. So for example, point of intersection, so basically wherever tangents meet, I can configure them to look a certain way. And I'm going to illustrate by using align PIP. Now this list of markers all comes from a specific part of the software, which is not actually under alignment. So I'll show you in a second when I can get out of this particular setting, but we will actually make a marker style later on. But they're a universal function. So they actually sit under general. And as I said, I'll show you where they are in a minute. So I'll make that one IP, and then I want my beginning to be, I'm just going to go a basic circle with a cross, And my end, I'm going to make the same basic circle with a cross. All right, so if I apply that to this style, all of these alignments will take that change. So if I look at the green one, you can see there's these triangle markers now where every tangent exists, which is what I asked for with all my IPs. And if I come up to the end here, you can see that there is a circle with a cross. So those markers, and you can make them live on different layers because the marker layer is a different piece in the properties. You can configure them up. You don't have to use them. But if I actually look at the intersection, sorry, start up here, the intersection of this curve, you'll see that the IP has been marked at the projection of the two tangents that form this curve. If I look at this first alignment over here, road 1, it doesn't exist. That actually comes from a property of the alignment. So the alignment in the green one over here, the existing crown, when I click on it, I see the projections. And if I come into the properties of that alignment, it actually is all being derived from this tab in the alignment properties, which is the implied point of intersection display option. So I've got it set on this one to show me the change in alignment direction. So basically, as the little pictures illustrate, it'll give me the IP points at those. Whereas the yellow alignment here is set to show none of them. If I turned it on, then I'll suddenly see them projecting across. So you can actually set that at an object level. Now, I will show you where they come from in terms of a setting later on when we talk about command settings, but you can predetermine whether or not they get included. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is where all this stuff lives up in the setting space. So I mentioned markers, so they actually live under this general multi-purpose marker styles. That's that list of markers that I was using for the alignment IP and beginning endpoints. As I mentioned, they are universal, so they live in this general field, and we will use them a little later on, but every time you use a marker, not just for alignments, could be for profiles, could be for a few other elements, they all use this common list. Okay, but alignments themselves, all of the controls for alignments lives in this space here. So let's make it a little easier for you guys to see. Bring the tool space out, make it a bit smaller. Doesn't take over too much of the screen. All right, so alignments. So first bit, alignment styles, which we just talked about. That is the housing of all of your styles that you've got for your alignment objects. Make a new one, right click, new, you're away. Design checks is the next one I want to look at. So I'm going to work my way down this list. So design checks are part of the design criteria, design standards, I guess is the way you describe it. Design checks are a geometric logical expression about the alignment properties. So if I expand that out like I've done, you can check things about lines. So in this case, it could be like the maximum length of a line or something like that. Curves, it could be things about radius of the arc. It could be arc length, lots of different combinations of elements. Then you could do the same thing for spirals, and then super elevation and tangent intersection. So you can actually build up a repertoire of logical expressions that you can check your alignment to make sure things do or don't comply with whatever standards you're after. So as an example, I am going to create a curve one, and I'm just going to set up one that allows me to check the minimum radius of my curves. So I'm going to call it minimum radius. You can write a description. It is simply for yourself to understand what you've done. Okay, under expression, this is the bit where you actually can write in the logic. So this button here allows you to access all of the properties that you may want to assess. And this one allows you to access functions that you may want to do, so mathematical functions. And then you simply put in the expression you want. So for all mine, I'm referring to radius. So I want to say radius is greater than or equal to, and in my case, I want to say 15 meters. So basically, I don't want any curves smaller than 15. Now that's a real simple example of what you can do, but you can actually make these things a little bit more complex. You can make them almost like an array. You can make it like an if statement. So if I make that one, and I show you one that has an if statement in it, so that's this one here. So this one is same concept, that we're checking the radius, but this time it is a series of if statements, and it's related to the design speed this time, not just the radius. So design speed is a property of an alignment. We'll look at that in a minute. So basically this statement says if the design speed is greater than 110, the radius has to be greater than 560. If the design speed is 100, 365, etc., 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 all the way to the very last one, which basically means anything less than 50, the radius has to be 35. So you can actually build these expressions up to being a bit more complicated than just a single check. You can actually check it against multiple property elements of the alignment itself. Now, the way you actually apply these checks is you use what's called a design check set. So very similar to the alignment label sets that we looked at previously, same concept. Sets is just a collection of rules that I want to apply. So if we come in here, and you'll see that there are a number of checks already created. I'm going to modify one of these and apply it to one of my alignments just to show you what happens. So the one I'm going to play around with is absolute minimum radius check. So if I click on here and go edit, it'll bring the check up. So same deal, there's an information tab where you can write information, and it looks like whoever made this, which was colleague Shane, has actually put the note in where he got the minimum radius values from. Now I'm actually going to ignore that, and I'm going to delete that minimum radius setting, and I'm going to come in and add the one I want. So you pick your type. So these are the types that match up with what was listed in the settings. So I want curve, and you can pick the particular rule that you've created. So I'm using my min radius, and I add that in. So this check set will check maximum tangent length, and will check my minimum radius. So let's okay that and apply it. So I'll redock that on the left, minimize it. Okay. So as I mentioned, that is one part of the check. So it's a geometric check, but there's also a design criteria property that allows you to, it's another form of checking. You can use it in conjunction with the design checks. It's essentially reading speed tables like out of your off-road design guides, that sort of stuff. So it's best illustrated by an example. So if I come in and go into the properties of this alignment, which is road 1, and let's jump across the design criteria. So in here is your options to design the element by criteria. So if I tick that on, it's saying I want to use criteria files and not check sets. Again, command settings change these things. When we get to the end of the session, we'll talk about those. But it's looked in the criteria file and actually found that the maximum speed is different to what I've got my speed of my road set to. So this road was set to 100 kilometers an hour. So I've either got to manually change the speeds, or I can just use the maximum amount of the file. So in this case, I'm just going to go maximum, which is 90. And then the file it uses for the criteria check is actually coming from this location. So if I make this big enough, you might be able to see it. So it is this bundle of stuff here. So program files, blah, 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 blah. I'm using Civil 3D 21, data, corridor design standards, metric, OS roads. If I click on the button, it's probably going to be easier for you guys to see. So if I drop the list down, that's the location of the files. And interestingly, the software does not allow you to specify a specific file. It will use the first file on the list as default until you change it otherwise. So here's tip number 1. If you want a specific table, which is just an XML file sitting in this folder, to be your default table to use for your projects, rename it so that it is sorted as the first file in the list. And then that will always be the default that is applied to your alignments when you turn the option on. All right. I don't actually want to design this thing with that because we've already designed the alignment. I just want to check the design against that criteria that we specified before, which was basic check, absolute minimum. And then the last check is whether or not the software will check the alignment for tangency at your curve tangent intersections. So as the picture implies, it will give you a warning when they're not correct. In terms of the design speed over here, you can actually preset the value in the command settings. Again, I will show you some of this stuff in a minute. But you can actually change it to be a different chainage. So perhaps at 0, it's 90, but you can come in here and add extra changes. So you can actually change the speed along your road as much as you like. And that will become relevant when we talk about different label types. So you can actually label those locations. You know, like the value, you can actually just click on it and change it to whatever you want. So I can make it 50K. All right. So let's go and see what happened to our alignment. So first thing I want to talk about, as I mentioned way before when I changed the style for the alignment to have that radius snapping. So this curve here is currently a 10-meter radius. If I try and change the radius, you can see how the curve is snapping. So every time I drop, no matter where I pick, it will always jump to an increment of 5. That's that radius snap in action that I set on the style. So that's what that's all about. If you don't want that, don't tick the option on, but that's what that does in terms of an object style. And it is unique to the style, not the object. So you could change the style of the object to display in a different alignment style, and then that snapping would be whatever's defined in that style. All right, now the design check stuff. Let's have a look at the geometry of this alignment. So it is actually a bundle of straights and curves. If I come and look at the table, there is a table of geometry, which is part of the geometry editing. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a segue here. There was a fantastic webcast done back in March, which was Civil 3D Alignments Profiles 101. Covers a lot of this stuff that I've just been talking about in terms of design standards and criteria in a fair bit more detail in terms of actual application to your alignments. I'm more talking configuration. One of my colleagues did that, and it is a great webcast. And if you want to know more about that stuff, I strongly encourage you to go and look on our YouTube channel for that one.
Todd, I'm just sorry, just jumping in now. I am going to fire up a screenshot of the web page. So, if anybody wants to know where to find those particular webcasts that Todd's referencing, I will show you at the end.
Cool. Thank you very much. All right. So, just as a quick example, this curve here, number 6, which is this curve here, it highlights in the drawing forming quite nicely, is the first one that's got a warning. So you can see the warning symbol here. So it's exceeded one of the rules. If you hover over the rule marker, it'll actually tell you which rule has it violated. So in there it says disappeared. Design check violated minimum radius. Now you can have multiple breaches of your design rules depending on how complicated the check is. So if you want to see a specific list of all the breaches for a particular element, you can actually bring up the individual properties for a element of your alignment, but it will also tell you underneath which of the criteria was actually exceeded. So if I had multiple breaches of my rules, it would show me all the ones that were breaching there. So I can then go make a change. So I can make a real good change on here, and it's going to make it 16 meters long, and then suddenly the violation disappears because it is not 15 meters anymore. All right. So that is design criteria, at least basics of how you make the mechanisms work. Let's go in.
Todd,
and yes.
I had a couple of questions. The first one is sort of just in relation to the design checks. Does the design check also work with alignments created from polyline objects?
Yes, it does, because all of these alignments were created from polyline in the first place. The design check, as I said, can be set at the time of creation. You can actually set which criteria is on, so I'm going to jump into it now. So alignment objects, you can go to the feature settings there, which is one of the command controls, and in here you have criteria-based design options. So you can actually turn this on to be true. You can set the default speed for your alignments as they're created. This will apply to any alignment creation method you use, whether it's from objects or by component. And then you can specify what check rule to use and all the options. As I mentioned, the only thing you can't specify is which is the default criteria file. So that's that renaming trick that I talked about. Sorry, you said there were a couple of questions. Was there another one, JT?
Yeah, I'm not too sure if we can answer this, but is it possible to see a super elevation diagram, or if we can create them at all?
Potentially, but that wasn't really part of this session.
Not really sort of part of this session.
No, this is more about alignment. Super is more about cross-section and corridor stuff. So Yeah,
Yep. All good.
wasn't part of my scope of topics to cover, and I don't know if I'd have time to get to that.
Absolutely
So
fine. No problem.
maybe another time.
Thank you.
Cool. So while I'm here, I might as well talk about some of the other feature controls that you can do. The implied point of intersection I mentioned can be controlled at an object level, but it can be preset. So this is where you preset it. So you can come in here and you can say that all alignments, when I create them, will have those three options which are in the properties by default. So you can make your most common one your setting here, and then you can activate it per object at an exception level. So you can change a lot of this stuff so that things are created, and you can actually go a bit more deeper than that, because you could actually change some of these settings for alignments created from one source differently to another, and I'll cover that when I talk about command settings at the very end. All right. The other thing I did think would be another tip to give you guys is in regards to the criteria files here, you'll notice, oh, sorry, I'll turn it back on. You'll notice in here I've got quite a few that say ANZ, and they've actually come out of the ANZ Country Kit for Civil 3D. So I've got the Civil 3D ANZ Country Kit 2021 installed. If you install that on your machines, which is download from the Autodesk website, you can get access to a lot of these tables as well. All right. So now let's have a look at some labeling. So next tip, station and chainage are interchangeable. Station is an American term for what we would call change in Australia. So I'm probably going to be referring to some things as chainage labels, but the software will say station label. They are the same term. So forgive me if I use a term that makes no sense if I say station, but I'm hoping most people are used to it these days. It is an American-based product, so the terminology in the core of the software, station equals chainage. All right. So labeling for alignments, there's actually a multitude of alignment labels that can be done. So chainage is the first one I want to look at, which is, as I said, station. And then there are actually a number of sources of information on the alignment that control where those change labels will live. So major station chainage is your common one, your typical one. It's your regular interval along your alignment object. The minor is a subset of that if you want it. So it'd be something like a tick. It's a regular interval, typically at a lower rate than your majors. And geometry point is your geometric start and end. So your tangent points, your start curves, big curves if you wanted them, start spirals, end spirals, all that stuff. So all the geometrical beginnings and ends of the subcomponents. The other pieces, so that's the top three, and they're probably the most common ones. The other pieces you can get are more related to properties of alignments. So profile geometry, actually let me make this bigger, sorry. Here we go. So profile geometry points, so they only show after you've associated a profile to the alignment, but you can actually label those as unique points on your marker labeling if you wanted it. Station equation is an interesting one. It's essentially the ability, well, station equations are the ability to change the labeling along your alignment. So you can have the labeling go up to a certain value and then begin to decrease from that value, or you can actually even have it to jump a chainage range. So you can do it as mathematical expressions, and you pick a station where those things happen. Station equation is your ability to label those points. Same with the design speed. I mentioned that you can set the design speed at multiple points along your alignment. Design speed labels are just labeling those locations. Super elevation critical points are, if you calculated the super stuff, you can label those on your alignments. Cant critical points are the same concept for super, but for railway, which is the tab here, the railway stuff. So you can label all those things. So they're like different sources of information, but at the end of the day, all these labels will typically look the same. So what we create for one, you can use to create for all the others. It's just the source of information that controls the location that really changes. Now, that previous webcast I did last month talked about label style defaults. That is set at multitude of levels. In this particular case, I'm going to talk about the label style default at an alignment level, which is level 1, not the top level. And the reason I'm talking about this is because I want to talk about this behavior and plan readability functionality. So typically when you label things, I would imagine most people want the labels to sit nice and square and parallel and perpendicular to their view direction, which is what the orientation is about. For chainages on my alignments, I actually want them oriented to the direction of my alignment. So we would always use the reference in those as object. Now this is setting these things at a parent level for all objects within the alignment's labeling capacity. So you'll notice there's a thing here called child override. It means that some of them at a lower level are changing the way that works, but by default it will try and apply everything to an object level, which makes sense because if you did a station offset label, which is labeling coordinates or something like that, you'd want that label to sit oriented to your view as opposed to your objects. So that's what the child override is about. The plan readable is another big one. So this one allows you to set whether the label flips after the angle of the label exceeds this 95 degrees. Great when you want things to maintain readability in your drawing, but for alignment labels, you probably want them to increase up your alignment. So whilst it's turned on here, you'll see that it's overridden at a lower level, which I'll look at in a sec. Typically the behavior you'd want for your Chainage labels. And if I come down here to major station and look at it, I actually get a label style default control at this level. Now, if I look at that plan readability option, this time it's actually set to false. This is where that child override has come from. And there's even actual individual labels that have overridden that option and changed things around. So you can mix and match that functionality, and that child override tells you when things have and haven't changed. But this is the default behavior I want when I make a new label for a Chainage, which is exactly what we're going to do right now. All right, so let's make a new one. We will go new. For the label I'm going to make here, it's just going to be a simple Chainage label going up. I'm going to have a line that also represents the cross-section point. And I'm going to set that line to sit below my text. So my text will sit above the Chainage. It'll make sense in a sec. But I want the width of that line to vary with the label length. So as the Chainage numbers get bigger, I want that line to get a little bit longer. I'm going to show you a way to do that. You don't have to do it that way. You can set the line length to be a fixed value. So I'll talk about it when I make the line in a sec. The label style composer is common to all label definitions within the software, not just alignments, all labels. And we talked about this in that previous webcast. So I'm not going to talk about a great deal of information on the bits. Suffice to say, the information is essentially where you name the things. So I'm going to use my good old basic name here. General is just the basic behavior of the label. This is where you can confirm text style, which I want, ISOCP, brilliant. Orientation to the object, and plan readable is in false. Layout is where you do all the work to build your label. And the preview over here on the right is actually quite useful. So you can actually zoom around in this thing and you can actually see your label changing as you make changes to the label definition. So the way labels work is a label can be made up of multiple components, and each component will be listed here in the list. The components that you can add are all of these different things here. So text, lines, blocks, ticks. You can even reference other object types. We'll look at that when we do some station offsets, but that allows you to interreference between different things. So perhaps you want to pull a level off a surface, and you can use this to do that. This one is about copying a component that you might like that you want to make a clone of, and this one allows you to delete them, and this one allows you to change the display order because that may have an impact on the way the thing looks. All right, the software also is quite nice in that it builds you a label that looks right when you first start. Not necessarily 100%, but I would suggest if you're building labels, the default one has probably got at least half of what you want, so modify it and keep going rather than delete everything and start from scratch. Okay, so the marker I want the text here to run, as I said, perpendicular to the alignment direction, and I want the text to actually be 3, yep, but I want my CH marker in front, so I'll do that, so I get that. Height 2.5 mils, that's fine for this. I want the orientation of the text to actually flip around so that it runs up the alignment. It's either -90 or 270, so that it flips around and starts running up. So it starts to run up the increasing alignment direction. I want bottom center I want to shift. And because I've flipped the rotation around, these things actually invert. So if I flip the Y offset to 0, you'll see that it recenters. And I actually want to shift the thing up 0.75. So it shifts the base point up from the insertion point. So this is labeling against the feature, which is the Chainage point itself. So 0 for this one, 10 for this one. It's also applying a gap with the border. Even though the border is not visible, there is a gap. So if I turn the border on, you'll see what I'm talking about here. See, there's a gap and a gap. So there's 0.75 mil from the bottom of the text to the border, and then 0.75 mil from the border to the actual feature. So that's a total of 1.5. That'll mean something in a sec. I don't want the border on. I want to now add in my line. So I come in here and I go add a line, and you can name these things. You don't have to keep the names that are there. So you can just name them whatever you like. I want the line to be visible. I want it to anchor to my actual object. Here, I'm going to say I want to anchor to the bottom left point. So it's over here. And the second point is actually going to anchor to the bottom right. So it's suddenly built me a line that is now pinned to the bottom left and bottom right of my Chainage label. So as the Chainage numbers increase in width, the label goes with it. But remember that 0.75 mil offset. See how the line is not inserting at 0? You got to actually push it back. So I want to go minus 0.75 and minus 0.75 to take the shift back out. And it'll shift it down to the 0 point or the 10 meter point. Also wanted to be a little wider, so I want it to be 1.5 mils wider this way and 1.5 mils that way. Bang. So there's my label the way I want to see it. All right. Let's go and...
Todd.
Yes.
Now, we have had a specific question about putting, a question about putting specific Chainage labels on at specific points. Now,
I will cover that.
Yeah, I thought so.
will definitely cover that in a couple of minutes.
No problem. Just thought to mention it. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Cool. All right, so let's go in, and I need to make a geometry point label to do the other half of the equation. So if I go in, so I'll show you what I mean. Let's just move this out of the way. So let's have a look at this alignment down here with some spirals and curves. So I'm using this one because it's got different colors. So the orange is my curves, the yellowy color is my straights, and the pink is my spiral components. If I grab this and I go, I want to add in some labels. Let's go major, basic, add that in, bang. So here's the label style that we just configured. So it starts at 0, labels run up in the direction I want. As the curvature occurs, I get to it, here we go. The labels will maintain its perpendicular nature to it and keep increasing going up. But I'm missing my labels at the geometry point. So let's go through and make that. So the process is going to be almost identical. So I'm going to do it reasonably quick because I don't need to actually talk about the points again. So, but I am going to do it differently. This time I'm going to actually apply the style first and talk about making the changes that one while I'm doing it. So that's the default style it comes up with before I do anything. It's actually pretty good. It's not far off what you necessarily want. So let's go in and edit the style. So in here, ISO, plain readability is true because the default is set to true. So I'm going to turn it to false. See, it suddenly flips. Go to layout. We want to change this to read. Now, I'm going to go CH, and then we're going to go the Chainage value, 3 decimal places, bang. There's also a component in here, and this is where this TP comes from. It's actually a geometry point code. You don't have to include them in your alignments, but you can, and the software has abbreviations for all the geometric possibilities, which I'll show you in a sec, of your alignment componentry. So we can come in here and say, I want the code, we'll insert that, but we're just going to throw it in as a bracketed piece of text afterwards. So apply that. So now it's suddenly my Chainage, and then it's TP, which is my abbreviation for my tangent point. That's great, but I need to orient this thing to the feature. So it'll push it over there. I need the rotation to be that -90. It needs to be bottom center. So it's starting to get what I look like. And we need to shift it up 0.75. Okay, so we've got the text the way we want, but now we need to fix up the line. So remember, we anchor that to the bottom left and the bottom right. So it's starting to get there, but the line's looking in a bit of a funky position. That's because we've got to play with these values down the bottom here. So it's minus 0.75 and it's minus 1.5, minus 0.75 and 1.5. And I got something wrong. X. Yeah, no. Let's just take it out. What did I do? Which one did I do wrong? Bottom left, bottom right. Ah, 0.75 minus for the Y. Ah, silly duffer. These ones, it's 1.5 minus 1.5. Yeah, there we go. All right, now I did mention that you can make these lines a fixed length. So I'm linking these to the bottom of the label, but I could actually link the connection to the feature, and I could actually say that the length is a definitive length in millimeters, which is drawing units. So it'll scale up and down depending on what size you do. So that's the way you could actually change it around. And you could apply that to any of your label types. So push that back. Okay, so now it's gone through and added those labels, and you can see that they're longer when the text gets longer. So that's that linkage I've done to it. You don't have to do it that way. It's just an example of what you can do. The codes for these components come from the abbreviation settings sitting inside the drawing settings. So it's here. So spiral tangent intersection is a TP, curve tangent is a TP. So that is what's driving these values here. So if I actually went and looked at one of the spiral points here, so that's the tangent point, but then the interface between the spiral and the curve is the SC, so it's spiral to curve, whereas this one will be CS, which is curve to spiral. So you can name them whatever you like, but that's the example of where those things come from. So you can change them at the top level and it'll apply to all of your object types. All right, so quickly about label sets. So label sets are, oops, that's what I want. Label sets are the same concept as that design check set. It's a set of alignment labels that you would create that you want to apply to your alignment. So you can do this at creation level. You can also do it after you've created an alignment. So, for example, in the last session, we made one called basic. So all we simply set was major stations would be labeled at this particular style, at this frequency, the geometry points, this particular style, for these particular geometric locations. That's all we set up. That's all I want to use for this example. So that's a basic set of layout, which is actually probably what's been applied to this alignment here, but I'm going to apply it to this one. So this alignment's been created, but no labels have been set up. So I come and look at the label list and it's blank. I can actually use this button down the bottom here, import label set, pick the style I'm after, click on OK, and it will apply that label, styles of major and geometry points, which probably aren't any geometry points, which is pretty funny, to that whole alignment. So you can do that at point of creation. You can also do that subsequently. You can change things around. Okay. There was a question about specific Chainage labels at a unique point. It's exactly what I'm going to do right now. So I want to label the point between these two intersections. So I want road 1's labeling to show me where the start of road 2 is. So you actually can use a station offset label to do this, which is not its initial intention, but is certainly quite applicable. So we come in and we say we want to make an alignment. We say we want to make a station offset label. I want to use this particular style and I don't want a marker. I click on add. I click on the alignment I want to put it in and then I pick the point. So let's go endpoint of that, 0 offset, and it drops me in a label. And this particular label has been configured to look the same as these, except you'll notice that the number of decimal places is different. That's because this one has got its 3 decimal places configured, whereas these are all set to 2. So there's a couple of ways you can fix this. You could actually click on the label. So let me just get rid of this thing for a moment. Right click on it and you can go edit label text. So if you didn't know that this function exists in the software, you can actually do this. You can then pick the component you want to change. So in here, I want to change this from 3 to 2 decimal places. Whenever you are in this form, always click the arrow. It's another big tip to make the change. So you select, change, arrow to apply. Okay, and it will change the number of decimal places on that particular label. But that is just a single application of that. The next time I use that label, it will still be 3 decimal places. You also get this glyph override warning. So if you're on the annotate tab, you can use this function here to hide it if you don't want to see it. It's a non-printable character, but it can be a bit annoying, so you can turn it on and off there. There's actually a function, this is another big tip. You can turn them off globally. So if you actually jump into your options and you go to the AEC editor and you untick this option here where it says display solution tips for drafting, it will turn off all the warning glyphs that relate to alignments, profiles, super elevation, and pressure networks throughout the whole software. Just turns them off globally. So I do that one and all those labels go away. I may not want to do that, but that's how you can do it. So that's the global level control. If I actually restore that text, so you can clear the override, so it'll go back to its 3. You can actually also do this another way. So this is where I'm going to show you what I call child labels. So station is the label type that's been used for this particular one. If you actually click on it and go new, you're making what's called a child label. So a child label, and I talked about this previously as well, allows you to take essentially all the properties of the parent, apply it to the child, you override a piece for the child, and then suddenly the changes for the child will be applied where it's used, but all the things that haven't been changed are controlled by the parent. So you can still change the font and the height of the text if you haven't overridden that in the child. So it maintains the ability to keep your label styles under control without having to copy multiple versions. So let me see if I can illustrate. So I'm going to call this one station 2 decimal points. And under the station value for the contents, I'm simply going to change this to 2. Remember to push it across. Click on OK. And then to apply it, you can actually change the style of a label once it's created. Just use the properties dialog box. So you open it up, pick the label, change the style, and now I'm suddenly got my 2 decimal point change label that matches my other one. Now, if you move the alignment geometry around, that label will shift. It will maintain its location. So you would need to shift it back if you made a change. So maybe you change the length of the alignment. It's just literally a matter of dragging the label, and you can actually just snap to the point you want. So you can shift them around, but they are at a user level of control. All right. So let's actually look at the Chainage offset label for what it was intended for, which is to label offset points relative to an alignment. So I'm going to make a new one over here. We will go and make a new one, and this one, I guess this is what I'm going to call it. The configuration of these things is exactly the same. It's the same composer to set these things up. I'm going to keep harping on about that because that's how the software is designed. I do want this thing to be plan readable, orientation, view, because I want the thing to stay like that to my text. But all I want to show in this particular label as an example is just the station, the Chainage, and I actually want to set a surface level. I want to use that reference text. I want to show you how that works. So we come into layout. There's already station offset there, so we'll modify that to what we want. But first thing I'm going to do is add in a piece of reference. And these are the things you can reference, and it works interchangeably. You can go to a surface and reference other pieces. But I want to reference a surface, and it'll ask me for a name. Let's just call it, actually we'll call it level. I want to anchor it to the feature. So it's these question marks showing up in the preview here, but I want to go to the middle center. So I want to anchor it straight to it. The contents of the label, I actually want to use the surface name, so I know which surface it comes from, RL for level, and then I want the actual surface elevation, 3 decimal places. Bang, so that'll put that in. 2.5 mil text is fine. Anchor it to the bottom center, so it'll shift up. I want it to sit high, so let's go up 5 mils. Now I come back to this station offset. So this thing is actually currently anchored to the feature, which is the point I'm labeling, I actually want to anchor it to the level. I want to stack it above. I want to anchor it to the top center, which is good. We need to change the contents. So let's just, we want to go, what do we want first? Let's see, we want Chainage, because we need to know where we are. Let's go Chainage, station value. And then we want to go offset. And we want to use the offset value. That'll do, bang. I don't want a border, so we'll turn that off. So there'll be my 3 pieces of text lined up on top of each other. All right. So let's go and apply this. So let's go alignment. We want station offset. There's 2 station offset types. So this is functionality wise, fixed point and just station offset. Station offset, you nominate the station or the chainage and the offset. Fixed point, you nominate the point and you calculate. So one stays fixed, one moves with the alignment. So let's do a fixed point one. Let's pick our basic. So these marker styles, as I mentioned, came from that global control at the top. I actually want to make a new one. So over here, these controls here allow you to actually pick things. So you can actually create new things, edit current selections. You can actually pick one from drawing. So if you've got something in a drawing you like, you can use that pick, and you don't know the name, you can pick it in the drawing and it will pick the appropriate style for you here. But I'm actually going to make a new label style just to show you guys how this works. So name, give it a name, we go marker. So there's 3 ways you can make a marker. You can just use the AutoCAD point, so that's your P-type control. You can customize your own one. It is one of the things on this side of the line and any combination of these things over here. So currently it's going to do nothing but a circle, but I could add a square, make a cross, something like that. Or you can use a block. And when you click that option on, it will show you every block that lives in the drawing, but you can access any block you like. If you right click in here and go browse, it'll allow you to go and pick a block that lives in an external file. There's another tip. So I want to use this one here, which is a bit of a crosshairy looking thing. I insert that. I'm going to make the thing 2.5 mils tall, so it's a standard size. Display wise, marker, layer 0, so the object layer, but I'm going to make it go by block. Okay, and let's go okay. So then it will, basic and basic, let's add it in. So it asks for the alignment, it'll ask for the point. And then because I referenced a surface, it asks for the surface. So you click on the little epsilons and then you can go and pick on the surface and it'll pick up your surface. You can go okay. And then it will now suddenly tell me my chainage, offset, and my level from my surface and naming the surface because I asked for it based on the marker. Let's do another one, which is the other type. So just a pure station offset. So this time, when you pick the alignment, it will ask for the station. So you can type a number if you wanted it. Let's go there. And then it'll ask for an offset. So go there. Again, it'll pick the surface. So if you don't know and you can't pick the surface, you can actually come down here and you press enter and it'll give it to you in a list. And you can pick it out of a list. Click OK, click OK. And then it has labeled that one. Now, because I made that marker by block, if I grab one of my labels, it's all inheriting the colors from the default layer, but I can actually override that and make one of these. The text will still come from the layer because that's the way it's been configured, but the block is all set to by block and the color controls is all going to come from whatever the object color is. Yet this one will remain green. And then to show you what happens if I change this alignment, let's go make it to that. That may be a bit more obvious. Let's go to that. We see how the red one actually shifts with the alignment because the chainage and the offset are maintained, whereas the other one stays where it was and those values change. It's the difference between fixed and station offset. All right, that's also an example of how you use your reference text. Okay, the other label types in here, down the bottom, I'll talk about line curve spiral in a minute when we look at segment labels. Tangent intersection and point of intersection are both exceptionally similar to station offset. The only difference is the marker isn't included because the intersection points are coming from the properties of the alignment. But other than that, the configuration of the labels is identical to station offset. So I'm not going to repeat that, but that you can configure them up in the same fashion. I will make the point, though, that the point of intersection ones will only display if you are showing the point of intersection on the alignment. If they're not there, you can't use them. So you've got to turn that option on in the alignment properties to be able to label them. All right. Okay, I'm getting close to the end of my session, and I want to show you how to do the segment labels. So I'll do one real quick example of line and curve, and then we'll make a table and conversion, and we'll talk about the table tags. So bear with me, people. I apologize for probably exceeding. I'm going to go over by about 5 to 10 minutes. The segment labels are these four here. So it is line, curve, and spiral. So they are the three possible parts that you get for your alignment. And you can label their geometry up in terms of maybe, bearing and length and stuff like that. And you can label the alignment with those. But if you want to convert that into a table of information, then you would actually make a table style to convert those labels, which is what that table tag is all about. So they're kind of interrelated. So one saying I always remember, and something I use in training, if you want to use a table, you must label. You've got to remember that, because you can't make a table without the labels. All right, let's make a line style. Let's just do something pretty straightforward. Let's go and put in the name and the distance. That'll be good enough. You notice when I create a brand new one, it has made a few pieces, but it has included this table tag. And that is crucial, because when you convert a label into a tag to make the table, it needs to know how. So it pre-builds them inside your labels. But if you did delete it, you would then need to actually put it back in. Actually, sorry, I'll rephrase that. I've changed it. You can't delete it. So it cannot be deleted. It can be configured, but it cannot be deleted. So you have to have it. It's always there, but you can configure it how you want. So in this case here, and this will make sense when we make the tags shortly, it's simply using the tag number and a prefix of L. And guess what? The curve one will be C, and I can bet you that the spiral one would be S. The other pieces are the other stuff that it's created. So it has automatically created me a direction arrow and bearing and distance. I'm going to use half of those. So I'm going to kill off the arrow because I don't want it. I am going to change bearing into name, and I am simply coming in here and I'm just going to delete all the contents and say I want the alignment name. So it'll tell me my name, and my distance is probably already set up to 3 decimal places, which is good. Yep, 3 decimal places. Brilliant. That's what I want. That's all I want to label. And the configuration for spiral and curve labels is identical. It's just different geometric properties. So let's go and make the curve one. Oops. And we go to layout, table tag. See, there you go, C, and then the curve number. Distance radius. We shall make that just distance. Just highlight everything, and we say we want length. Bang. So you can see here, so I got my length, and then delta is actually going to become name. So we grab all of that, and we just say alignment name, push it across, bang, there's our alignment name. All right, so let's go and apply those to one of our alignments. So I'm going to use this row 1 again. Something I didn't actually mention when I did, but it's another tip. If you click this pin, it will actually pin the label thing and allow it to compress until you hover over the top. So if you're starving for space, it's another little way to gain some drawing space without actually closing down the form. So alignment, you can label individual segments or multiple segments. So if you do single segment, you can pick the location for the label, and you'd have to do each piece of alignment. So if you've got a long alignment with lots of bits, take too long. If you go multiple segment, you can pick the alignment and it will label every segment at its center with the label style, curve style, and spiral style that you specify. So let's go and use our basic that we just set up. We haven't got any spirals or anything, so it doesn't matter. If I click on add and I click on the alignment, then it will go through and add in a label at each one. So there is all of my labels for the various segments, whether they be curve or straight. And it's labeling my distance and my road name. That's cool. That's the way I could label it. And then those properties will go with the alignment. So if I actually change that, Chainage label goes with it. And they're all dropped in at the center. So another thing I will give you a tip on, if you use the multiple segment command, irrespective of whether you made a single segment label previously or previous multiple labels, it will add a full set of labels to your alignment. So you may end up with 2 labels per element or 3, which is fine if they're all on top of each other. I guess it's not end of the world, but if you're pedantic like me, you don't really want multiple labels for the same thing. But when it comes to a table, it will cause you some problems because you'll end up with the same entity in the table more than once. So use the multiple segment command, but be careful that if you've got labels already labeled, then when you convert, you may end up with multiple entries for the same component in your table list. All right. So that's it for the segment labels. Let's jump into tables, which is kind of a segue straight from these segment labels. Table styles, there are 4 types of tables you can create for an alignment: a line table, a curve table, and a spiral table, and what's called a segment table. So line, curve, and spiral are unique to the type they are, so whether they be curve, spiral, or aligned. And they are from any alignment, and you have to specify the label or the tag to include in the table. Whereas a segment table is all of the labeled segments for an alignment, and it is all of the alignments. It's only one alignment. So 2 different ways to generate the same thing, but one would be 3 tables with 3 separate bits, 1 table, all the bits for 1 type of table, which is actually the one I want to show you now. So if I come in, and I'm actually going to drive this a little differently, I'm going to create the table first and then edit second to show you that you can do it in a completely different way, but still end up with the same result. The table I want to use is this one, Chainage, easting, northing, radii. Yep, that looks good. I'm going to pick my alignment. So I'm going to say I want this one because it's the one with my tags. If I hadn't done an alignment with tags, it wouldn't work. Table splitting. So this is pretty common whenever you insert a table, and I'll show you what happens. Let's go split at 10, click on OK. And let's put the table in here because I'm just going to put it right over the top of all my stuff. 2 things happen. 1, the table gets inserted, and 2, all of those labels convert into their tag versions. So lines become L's, curves become C's. So this is line 1, curve 1, line 2, curve 2, etc., all the way along the alignment, which will pair up with this table of information. So there's line 1, curve 1, line 2, curve 2, line 3, curve 3, etc., etc., etc. The numbering convention for those things comes from a setting sitting up the top here at table tag numbering. So if I'd opened this before I did it, it would have been all 1s, but because I have created, what have I created? I've created 8 curves and 9 lines, hence why it's saying the next numbers available are 10 and 9. So it'll keep track of those things. You can preset those numbers to start wherever you would like. All right, to configure a table, it is kind of the same process as a label. It's just that it's a matrix of labels. Think of it that way. There's still a display control, so you can control how these things appear in your drawings. So I'm going to simply change all of these things I want. So I want all the fill to be really dark. And I want this text to go red because I like red. And I click apply, and then it'll suddenly change everything in my drawing. Data properties is the bit where you fill in the content of the table. So it's that matrix of labels. So table settings allows you to configure how the thing looks in terms of whether text wraps or not, and that's related to whether you've got the width set to automatic or manual. So if it's on manual, you define a width, and the wrapping takes effect and allows things to wrap around. Orientation to the view, pretty obvious, you want your tables to stay flat. Repeat the headings. So that's why this heading repeated on the second table, because they've been turned on. In terms of the text settings over here, it's height control and the font control for the table. So maybe I want this thing to be only 3.5, and I want the headings all to be this civil style, which will look a little different. So apply that. So that text shrinks, changes to a different font, which is Arial, I think, but the data still stays sitting in this ISO CP style. In terms of sorting, you can control how it sorts by using one of the columns of information. So it's actually currently set to use column 3, which is the Chainage column, which probably makes sense, because if you'd set it to to column 1, then you would actually get it sorted in alphabetical sense. You get C1s, then L1s. Maybe you want that. That's how you would achieve it if you wanted to do it that way. But I actually think it makes sense to have it setting in Chainage order. Okay, in terms of the information, because this is a segment table, there is potential for 3 types of pieces to come in. Line curves and spirals. So you need to configure what happens for each. You can configure the name of the table by double clicking on the top line, and you can grab, oh, there you go, look, you get the whole of one property, the name of the alignment. You can insert that and can configure that how you'd like to see. Then each of these is the heading values for each of the columns of data. So this one's a blank column because it's literally just start and end information. And then the content is each of these 3 rows. So you have to configure them all. So that's best shown by an example. Let's come in and we'll add in that length that we've been putting in. Let's come in for lines. So this is my line component editor. So I want to say for my line, I want length. And I actually want the thing to be centered. So click OK. And then this one's for curves. So come in here and go for curve, I want length as well. And then for my spirals, if I had them, I will again put in length. And I can configure the units on these things. If I apply that, then my table will suddenly get bigger, shows me my length. If I resort it, so I can just drag the columns in the order I want, you can reconfigure them. So that's the real basics on table style editing. The only other thing I would say is if you wanted to change the order of these pieces of information in here, you would need to do it at every cell. So perhaps you, instead of it wanting to go in start, end, IP, you wanted to go start, IP, end, you'd need to go into each of the cells for the curves and reorder the values. It's not the end of the world, but just bear in mind that that change has to be done to each column of information. All right. Command settings. So I apologize, I've gone over by about 10 minutes, but let me see if I can give you a quick rundown on how command settings works. So command settings is the last field here. It is your ability to actually manipulate how a specific command runs rather than at an object level. So there's a few I want to highlight. When you create an object from, an alignment object from polylines, there is conversion options in terms of deleting existing polylines and adding curvature. That all comes from the entity option. So don't pick the create a line from existing. It's not the right command. It's actually this one. So there's another tip. When you click on here and you go to edit command settings, laid out in a very similar way, but at the top here, there's one called create from entities. This is where you can set those conversion options for when you convert a polyline to an alignment. So if you want the radius to be a certain value, enter it in here. If you want the curves to be added, enter it true or false. And if you want the polylines to be always erased, you can change it to true or false here. So that's where you can preset that option. So that's what the command settings is all about, presetting how a specific command runs. Another one that I thought would be useful to talk to you about is the, let me make this taller, marker settings. So you can set that at a top level. So we can say in default styles that my markers are always a basic circle with cross. That would impact everything unless it's changed specifically somewhere else. But for a particular label type, so say you were doing the station offset, label, you can actually come in here, which is this one. So that's an add a line off label, funky name. You can say in here the default style, you can actually use that basic. But you can come to this one, which is the other offset station style. This is the fixed point version. You can actually come in here and say, yeah, I don't want to use that. I actually want to use my default style as, I don't know, the alignment IP marker. I'm going to do that. So that means when I run that command, that's the default it uses. The other one is the default for the other type of label. Another one that might be very useful for people will be when you're creating offset alignments. You might want to control that default width that it uses and the style of what that alignment looks like. That all comes from this command here, create offset alignment. So you come into this one and you look at the dynamic offset alignment options, you can control here the widths. So when you go left, it'll go by default 3 meters. When you go right, it'll go 3 meters. And in terms of default styles, and it's already been configured in this drawing, it's using a different style. It's actually using the offset alignment label style. So you can change that stuff around. So if there's always a value you're using, or you think you most commonly use, change it here, and then you're done. All right, and then the last one was those tables that we mucked around with. You can actually pre-configure these 4 commands at the top. You can actually change what happens when that table creates. You can go table creation and you can change that if I'm doing a segment table, it is this. Whereas if I was doing a line table, it would be this type of table. So these lists will come from your list of table types for the various elements, but you can predefine which one is used in which command. So that's what command settings are all about. All right, JT, I am done, and I apologize to everyone profusely for going a little bit over. I think there was some good stuff there, but yeah, I'm sorry about that, guys.
No, I don't apologize. Look, there's a lot of content, and you know, we are conscious of trying to sneak them into the hour mark, but you know, at the end of the day, that's not always possible with the amount of content we're trying to show.
Yeah, I did compress a lot of stuff into that hour,
exactly.
So.
Yeah, no, absolutely fine. Well, look, the only question that sort of remains semi-unanswered was probably related to dragged states, but we did cover that last week. Last month, in the webcast, Civil 3D Templates 101. So,
drag. What do you mean with drag state? Sorry.
Say again. As in drag state for an alignment label.
Yes, I didn't really look at that in great detail because we covered it in the other one, but I can rip one up.
Probably not now. I'm just conscious of time because I've just got to sort of bookend, as it were, with just a couple of things. But yeah,
it was covered in the previous webcast.
It was,
the drag state of any label is common in terms of how you configure them. So if you could apply the same function to those.
Great. And look, if you, I'll come on to feedback and other questions in a second. But what we'll do is I will share my screen. I think we're probably bingo for time in respect of any other questions. I think the rest of them, Todd, you've managed to answer, which was absolutely fantastic. So I will just share my screen. Guys, if you aren't aware, we have a YouTube channel onto which we've now got a very extensive library going on of different disciplines or areas. If you are interested, you can go to the Civil 3D Webcasts playlist, and in there you'll see that there is a fair few webcasts specifically related to Civil 3D, and the one that Todd was referencing before is top of the list. So that was the last one that we published. In fact, that was 15th of July. So go ahead and have a look at those. All the recordings of all the webcasts, we've done just over 20 this year. So we've done a lot. They're all available on the YouTube channel, as you've just seen. So coming up for the rest of August, we've got alignments, best practice for civil site design, which kind of ties into what Todd's been doing, because it's not just alignments with civil site design alignments, it's civil 3D alignments as well, resolving model geometry. And if you did happen to have any questions further to what Todd showed you today, feel free to pop to the website shown here and have a look and provide us with any feedback that you might have.